Welcome, dear listener, to another deep dive. Have you ever, scrolled through your social media feed and just felt like the internet itself had a mind? Almost. Almost a will of its own.
Yeah, like there's this invisible force guiding trends, maybe spreading ideas, or even pushing, a collective frenzy sometime.
Exactly. It's a feeling that's both fascinating and, let's be honest, a little unsettling. Well, today we're embarking on a pretty extraordinary journey. We're blending ancient, mystical concepts with really cutting-edge technology. We're diving into this intriguing hypothesis of the algorithmic egregore.
Hmm.
Imagine like a ghost in the machine, but one that hungers for engagement. It gets stronger with every share, every comment.
It sounds poetic, maybe, but it points to something quite real, potentially. This hypothesis suggests that modern algorithms, the recommender systems, the engagement optimizers, they start to behave like these self-reinforcing collective entities.
Right, sustained by our ritualized human attention.
And what's really fascinating here is how this ancient concept, an egregore, this collective thought form from occult lore, can offer a surprisingly um, apt lens to understand the emergent properties we see on digital platforms. We're talking about something born from millions of human interactions and, well, the quiet logic of code constantly feeding off our attention.
That's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We'll explore this whole idea by looking at sources from all over the place, moving from these sort of mythopoetic reflections to more academic rigor.
Right, fields like occult studies, cultural evolution, and of course, machine learning. We want to understand the causal mechanisms at play.
And crucially, we'll look at real-world examples, things like, the QAnon phenomenon or the wild ride of meme stock frenzies. These really illustrate these powerful dynamics quite clearly.
Yeah, our mission today is essentially to give you a shortcut, a way to get well informed on this topic, pulling out the essential nuggets of knowledge. You'll hopefully get some surprising facts and just enough context to understand what might really be happening beneath the surface of your digital world.
So what does this all mean for us? For us as users, as creators, as citizens in this digital age? Let's dive deep into the algorithmic egregore and see what reflections it shows us about ourselves and, well, the world we're collectively creating. Okay, so to really get a handle on this fascinating concept, let's start with a few key terms. Think of this as our foundational vocabulary. It'll help us understand how myth and science kind of intertwine in this deep dive.
Yeah, exactly. Defining these concepts clearly lets us move beyond just, metaphor and into a more systematic, maybe even testable analysis of what's happening. It grounds the whole discussion.
Okay, first step. Egregore. Now, in medieval lore, it's described as a spirit or a thought form created by group devotion. But how do we translate that to our digital age?
Well, for our purposes, think of an egregore as an emergent group phenomenon. So imagine an online community, right? Through synchronized actions, maybe repeated posts, shared beliefs, even online chants, they develop a collective pattern. And this pattern then seems to take on a life of its own. It starts influencing individual members almost unconsciously.
So it's like a feedback loop.
Exactly the key, a self-reinforcing loop. The group's collective output feeds back to shape individual behaviors, creating this cycle that appears to have independent momentum. It's almost like the community develops its own personality or, its own will.
Okay, interesting. Next, a word we all use constantly, meme. Richard Dawkins originally coined it in a much broader sense than just funny internet pictures, didn't he?
Absolutely. Dawkins defined a meme as a unit of cultural transmission.
Yeah.
Or a unit of imitation.
Mm-hmm.
So these are ideas, behaviors, styles, anything that spreads from person to person. They replicate by leaping from mind to mind, kind of like genes.
Right.
And in Memetics theory, they're often called selfish replicators. Why? Because they spread for their own sake, not necessarily for the benefit of us, their hosts. You can track a meme by seeing how quickly it's copied, maybe how it changes or mutates, and how long it lasts. Think of To the Moon in a stock trading community.
Oh, yeah, totally.
It gets copied, repeated, it influences people's actual financial behavior, and ultimately that benefits the spread of the meme itself.
And then there's the attention economy. This concept really frames the whole modern digital landscape, doesn't it?
It really does. It basically describes our reality where human attention is treated as this scarce, incredibly valuable commodity. Herbert Simon famously noted way back that in a world boosting with information, our attention becomes the bottleneck.
Makes sense.
So digital platforms, especially the ones funded by ads, are in this fierce competition to capture and hold your attention. Why? Because that translates directly into revenue.
Right.
We measure it with metrics like, time spent on site, click-through rates, daily active minutes, all that stuff. So when algorithms optimize for the attention economy, they're essentially just maximizing these engagement metrics to drive profit.
Which brings us neatly to recommender systems. These are the sort of silent engines behind so much of what we actually see online.
That's exactly right. These are usually machine learning algorithms, and their job is to predict your preferences and suggest content. Think the videos YouTube shows you, the movies Netflix recommends, what pops up in your Facebook newsfeed.
Yeah, all of it.
They analyze your past behavior, your profile, everything they know about you, to give you this ranked list of content. And it's designed, usually, to maximize your interaction, your engagement.
So they're deciding what we see.
In our context, yeah, they are the primary mediators of attention. They decide what you see based on these complex models that have learned how to keep you engaged, how to keep you clicking, watching, scrolling. Any algorithm that curates content to maximize a specific metric really falls under this crucial umbrella.
And central to all of this is the feedback loop. That's more than just tech jargon, right? It seems deeply tied to how these egregores might actually form.
Definitely. A feedback loop is, simply put, a cycle where a system's output feeds back in as an input, which then influences the next output.
Okay.
So in the digital world, an algorithmic feedback loop happens when an algorithm influences your behavior, what you click on, maybe.
Right.
Your behavior then provides new data back to the algorithm. And that data further shapes what the algorithm shows you next, reinforcing the whole cycle.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine an algorithm suggests some videos. You watch one. That engagement, the watch time, maybe trains the algorithm to suggest more videos like that one, which you might watch again, intensifying the loop. And we can actually detect this. We can observe how changes in what an algorithm promotes lead to changes in user behavior, which then often further escalates the algorithm's promotion of that same topic.
The idea of a fitness landscape also pops up here. It's borrowed from biology, but it explains how these systems optimize.
Yes, exactly. Picture a topographical map, like hills and valleys. On this map, the peaks represent optimal solutions, or high fitness. In algorithmic terms, it describes how the system navigates and optimizes for, say, engagement. So if outrage-inducing posts generate more clicks, that's a peak on the engagement landscape.
So the algorithm climbs towards it?
It climbs towards it.
Yeah.
And it might even get stuck there, recommending only outrage, like being trapped on a local summit, unable to see a potentially better, less outrageous peak elsewhere. It helps explain why algorithms might consistently push content towards specific attractors of attention, which can often correspond to viral or sometimes even extreme phenomena.
Let's talk about ritual. That sounds ancient, but this paper adapts it for our, daily digital interactions.
It does. We use ritual here to describe the repeated, patterned interactions users have with platforms. Think about the daily habit of checking your social feed first thing in the morning.
Yeah, guilty.
Or maybe a community mass posting a specific hashtag at a scheduled time to try and get it trending. The key elements are repetition, collective participation, and often a shared symbolic or emotional meaning.
So it's ritualistic if it reinforces the group.
If users regularly engage in behaviors that reinforce their community identity and feed consistent data to the algorithm, that's ritualistic in this context. We look for synchronized, rule-bound behavior, like those coordinated trend pushes by online fan communities trying to boost their favorite artist.
Okay, this all builds towards emergence. How complex systems show properties that aren't obvious just from looking at the individual parts.
Emergence is absolutely central to the whole hypothesis. It's when interactions among many components, like users and algorithms, produce some kind of higher-level order or behavior that wasn't planned or intended by any single component.
Like the system takes on a life of its own.
Kind of. We sometimes distinguish between weak emergence, which you can still sort of derive or predict from the underlying rules, and strong emergence, which implies truly novel causal powers, something irreducible.
Give me an example.
Okay, think of an online community developing a cohesive ideology or maybe even its own internal language that no single user actually intended. It just arose purely from their interactions, mediated perhaps by the platform's features. Researchers have observed emergent preference bubbles like radicalization pathways that weren't explicitly programmed but emerged from these user algorithm interactions.
Wow. Okay, finally, agency. This is a big one. Does an algorithm or a collective phenomenon actually have agency?
Yeah, this is a really deep philosophical question, but we need a working definition. We distinguish between strong agency that's genuine intention, self-awareness, like a human hopefully has,
Right.
and weak agency, Weak agency is goal-directed behavior without conscious intention. A thermostat has weak agency. It acts to maintain a set temperature based on its programming.
Okay, so algorithms have weak agency.
When we talk about an algorithm displaying agency, that's usually what we mean. Weak agency. It adapts. It chooses actions like what content to show you based on a goal, usually maximizing engagement. But it isn't conscious.
But people feel like it's making choices.
Exactly. Users often perceive agency. They feel like the algorithm wanted me to stay online, or the feed is trying to make me angry. And AI theorists like Stuart Russell suggest that advanced recommenders will actually behave like rational agents, effectively learning to modify your mind, your preferences, to achieve their programmed reward.
Chilling.
It is. And our analysis really explores just how far this metaphor of agency can stretch when applied to these complex socio-technical systems.
Okay, with those terms sort of laid out, let's step back in time a bit, because it's here in occult and religious studies that this egregore concept really begins, and it offers this rich metaphorical lens for us to use.
It does. This historical domain provides a really powerful mythopoetic reflection. Now, while it's not strictly scientific in the modern sense, it gives us this compelling vocabulary for phenomena we're now observing in our digital spaces.
How so?
Well, it highlights how humans have, for a long time, sought to make sense of collective forces. Forces that feel larger than individual will, seemingly born from shared focus and intent.
So traditionally in esoteric literature, what exactly is an egregore?
Okay, so it's generally described as a collective spirit or a thought form. Basically an autonomous psychic entity that's created by and then also influences the thoughts of a group.
Where do people talk about this?
Historically, you'd find references in places like magical orders, secret societies, sometimes religious congregations. Occultists like Eliphas Levi back in the 19th century suggested that intense, sustained group focus through things like prayer or ritual could actually generate such a metaphysical entity.
Wow.
Even the Book of Enoch uses the term, originally maybe for fallen angels, the Watchers, emphasizing its root meaning of wakeful. But over time, the concept really evolved to mean a kind of guardian thought spirit, a presence born of shared consciousness.
Okay, what's the core mechanism implied here? And how does it maybe connect to something more grounded, like sociology?
The core idea, the mechanism, is that a community performing rituals in unison, chanting prayers, symbolic acts, whatever, conjures this emergent presence through sustained collective attention. Now, if we strip away the supernatural layer, we can actually look at Emil Durkheim's foundational work in sociology. He observed what he called collective effervescence during rituals, this powerful force that felt greater than any single participant, and it bound the group together.
Like a shared energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He argued this feeling was the group symbolically creating a sacred presence, which then unified them. So an egregore, in this light, is kind of like Durkheim's collective conscience, but given a personality, a persona. And this raises a really important question for us today. Can we see a modern parallel in things like online mobs or intense fan communities, where synchronized actions generate a shared identity and a momentum that feels almost external guided, as if by the movement itself?
And it's not just religious groups, right? The paper points out that even corporations have been likened to egregores. That's a powerful analogy.
It really is. Think about it. A corporation is technically a legal fiction, right? Yet it outlives any individual employee, even founders. It acts through its members as if it's following its own internal logic, usually growth or profit. It operates as if it has a singular will.
Yeah, you feel that working in one sometimes.
Right. Many people work towards its goals almost as if serving an unseen master. And similarly, an internet memeplex, or a social movement, can behave like a corporate entity made of ideas, with human participants acting as its agents.
And they need feeding.
That's what occult writers like Mark Stavish note. Egregores require feeding. If the group's attention, their focus, wanes, the egregore supposedly dissipates, which sounds a lot like an online trend that just dies out when people stop talking about it, doesn't it?
It really does. So these digital rituals we talked about, our daily habits, our online interactions, they're not just empty repetitions then?
Not at all, according to ritual theory and anthropology. Rituals aren't just empty gestures, they actively shape our beliefs and perceptions. By repeatedly enacting gestures or phrases, participants reinforce particular mental states and strengthen social bonds.
So checking your feed is shaping you.
Online, think of the ritualistic nature of checking your feed daily, or reacting instantly to trending outrage, or mass posting a specific hashtag with your community. These are ritual patterns that both reflect and strengthen a shared mindset. As the anthropologist Tanya Luhrmann observed, through ritual, beliefs become experientially real. The more we participate in these algorithm-driven routines, the more real and pressing the content feels, almost as if it had independent power.
This brings us to the concept of tulpa from Tibetan mysticism. That mirrors the egregore idea even more closely, and you mentioned a chilling modern example.
Yes, a tulpa. In occult interpretations, it's a being created purely from thought and visualization. The idea is that sufficiently concentrated mental energy can produce a semi-autonomous psychic form. There are even modern practitioners who describe creating these imaginary, friend-like tulpas that feel independent.
Okay, how does that connect?
Well, in a digital context, you could argue that QAnon became a kind of tulpa. An imaginary entity, Q, conjured into perceived existence by a community's collective belief and focus.
Wow.
And this Q then acted back on believers, giving apparent instructions via the anonymous Q drops, offering a profound sense of purpose. Believers, in turn, perform these investigative rituals, constantly decoding, sharing, feeding the tulpa, keeping it alive in the discourse.
So it sustains itself through belief.
Which raises that important question again. How much of our digital reality is shaped by these collectively imagined self-sustaining entities? And what happens when they become politically or socially active?
So this occult perspective, while it might seem pretty far-fetched on the surface, actually provides a unique vocabulary, a way to talk about phenomena that are otherwise quite hard to describe.
It really does. I mean, when members of an online group say something like, this movement has just taken on a life of its own, they are, in effect, acknowledging an egregore. They feel that external force.
Right.
Our task, scientifically, is to strip away the mysticism and see what's left underneath. And what's left is often a self-organizing system where collective attention plus ritualized behavior equals emergent influence.
So the entity is the pattern.
The entity, like a viral movement, can be studied using tools like network analysis and feedback loops. But for the participants, the experiential reality is often one of being driven by something larger than themselves, which is precisely how an egregore is described in occult terms. If enough people focus their minds, and crucially today, their clicks, on something, it acquires a certain kind of power.
And algorithms are the facilitators.
Exactly. Algorithms, in this view, act as the ritual facilitators of the digital age, channeling and amplifying this collective focus in unprecedented ways.
Okay, so from ancient mystics, we now shift gears to something a bit more modern, but arguably just as powerful. Memetics, the idea of cultural evolution. Richard Dawkins coined the term meme way back in 1976, and this is where it gets really fascinating when we start thinking about algorithms.
Yeah, it's a really insightful connection, isn't it? The scientific metaphor of memetics seems to converge quite neatly with the more mythopoetic idea of the egregore.
How so?
Well, both concepts speak to something emergent, something that feels bigger than individual intent. But memetics grounds it in an evolutionary framework. It gives us a more tangible way, perhaps, to understand how these ideas or patterns spread and persist.
Dawkins called memes replicators, like genes, implying they propagate almost as if they have their own interests. So selfish memes are these literally ideas that spread just for their own sake.
That's precisely the idea. They propagate whether they're actually useful to us or enriching, or even if they're harmful to their hosts of us.
Like a virus.
Exactly like a virus.
Right.
Some memes succeed simply because they are very good at replicating in their specific environment. The psychologist Susan Blackmore, she's a big proponent of memetics, suggests humans essentially became meme machines, carriers whose brains and now technologies are harnessed to copy and spread memes.
Wow, meme machines.
She even provocatively suggests our consciousness itself might just be a complex memeplex, a bundle of co-adapted memes.
Oh, yeah.
And if that's the case, then an egregore could perhaps be reframed as a memeplex that exhibits agency, a situation where people think they're acting autonomously, but they're actually being driven by the underlying drive of the memes to replicate.
Can you give an example of that?
Think of a viral social media challenge. Sometimes the fervor around it can seem to override individual judgment or common sense, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That could be seen as the underlying idea, the meme wanting to spread, using human hosts to do so.
So memes compete in a kind of selection environment. And today, algorithms are basically the gatekeepers in that environment.
Yes, exactly. A meme's fitness can be measured by its basic reproduction number. How many new people does one exposure convert into active sharers?
Okay.
So a funny cat GIF might have incredibly high fitness on Instagram, but very low fitness in, say, a scholarly forum. Memetics gives us tools to track how frequently a meme is copied, how it mutates or varies.
And you mentioned memeplexes.
Right, memeplexes. These are clusters of memes that sort of support and reinforce each other, traveling together as a package. Religions are often cited as classic examples, a collection of beliefs, rituals, symbols, moral codes, all bundled together. Dawkins polemically called them viruses of the mind.
And QAnon, you mentioned, is a prime example of a memeplex on the internet.
Absolutely. QAnon isn't just one single meme, it's a whole package, right? You've got the deep state cabal narrative, the symbolism decoding, often anti-vax elements, all sorts of things, all traveling together.
And it spread like wildfire.
It had remarkably high fitness on certain platforms because it was incredibly good at absorbing new memes, mutating slightly to survive scrutiny or changing circumstances. And this is where network theory becomes really important too. Idea spread is a lot like disease spread.
How so?
Well, whether something goes viral often depends less on its intrinsic quality, whether it's true or good, and more on the structure of the network it's spreading through. Things like hubs, influencers, clustering, echo chambers, and the thresholds people have for adopting a new idea.
So social media is the perfect breeding ground.
It provides almost perfect conditions. Scale-free networks with powerful influencers, algorithmic amplification that boosts content already showing engagement momentum, and incredibly low-friction sharing. Just click a button.
So algorithms aren't just passive conduits here. They're actively shaping the meme's environment.
Exactly. They're active players. They act as accelerants, boosting content that's already hot, and they function as powerful transmission vectors, spreading memes further and faster than ever before.
Which raises a pretty critical question.
Yeah. How much does the algorithm, simply by amplifying what's currently popular or engaging, effectively select for certain types of memes? Maybe ones that provoke strong emotions regardless of their truth or their value or their impact on society.
Like the meme stock phenomenon with GameStop. The core idea that buying GameStop stock will hurt hedge funds and make regular folks rich, that was a meme that just exploded.
Yes, a perfect example.
Yeah.
The hashtag GME meme had huge emotional appeal, tapping into resentment, and it had a very clear call to action, buy and hold. It spread virally within Reddit's R Wall Street Bets community, which already had this strong, shared, almost renegade identity.
And the algorithms helped.
Critically, yes.
Yeah.
Platform algorithms started highlighting it everywhere. News feeds, trading apps, other social media platforms, they all started presenting posts about GameStop because those posts were suddenly hot, getting lots of interaction. The meme of holding the line or diamond hands became so self-referential, so powerful within the group, it really took on those egregore-like qualities we talked about. It created an identity, apes together strong. It was this potent memeplex that leveraged algorithmic amplification to go from chatter on a subreddit to a genuine market-moving force.
It really sounds like algorithms are creating a whole new evolutionary criterion for memes. It's not just about what people actively choose to share anymore, but maybe what they linger on or react strongly to, even negatively.
Precisely. And this is where Goodhart's law becomes so relevant again. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
How does that apply here?
Well, if algorithms are primarily designed to optimize for engagement metrics, clicks, watch time, shares, reactions, then memes, the content itself, will inevitably evolve to provoke the strongest reactions. Things like outrage, awe, intense laughter, because those generate the most engagement signals.
Even if they're not good signals.
Right. A meme that might have had only moderate spread in a more neutral environment can suddenly cause a huge cascade in an engagement-optimized ecosystem. Think about harmless things, like the sudden craze for sea shanties on TikTok a while back.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Or much more harmful things, like viral misinformation about COVID cures. The algorithm, because it's generally blind to truth or intrinsic value, simply rewards whatever captures attention most effectively. This leads to content being optimized purely for virality, often above all else.
So Memetics suggests these algorithmic egregores aren't mystical demons after all, but maybe more like selfish information complexes, things that just want to spread.
Exactly. They have no consciousness, no intent in the human sense, but they behave as if they had a will. The simple, powerful will to propagate. They prefer algorithmic hosts the platforms and their systems that best help them replicate.
Like Blackmore said.
Yeah, Susan Blackmore's formulation is really apt here. Memes are stories, songs, habits that spread for their own benefit, not necessarily for the benefit of the people who copy them. Now, if we just replace the word memes with viral algorithmic trends, the statement still holds perfectly true.
Even if it harms us.
Right. Even if the participants don't ultimately benefit, or the platform itself faces backlash, or society is harmed, the trend spreads simply because it's highly adaptive within that specific attention ecosystem created by the algorithms. It's a powerful, if slightly unsettling way to understand how these seemingly autonomous collective behaviors can emerge.
Now, it is worth noting, as you said, that not all scholars are fully on board with the biological analogy of memetics. There are critiques, right?
Yes, absolutely, and that's an important point for academic rigor. Critics like Stephen Jay Gould, for example, famously called memetics a meaningless metaphor. He pointed out that human culture involves intentional transmission, conscious innovation, learning it's not just random mutation and selection like in biology.
It's just a metaphor.
We have to acknowledge that describing social contagion as a purely Darwinian process is itself a metaphorical stance. However, it's proven to be a very fruitful metaphor for generating testable hypotheses.
Like what?
Like, for instance, does introducing a slight amount of algorithmic friction, say, making it harder to share instantly, actually reduce the fitness of toxic memes, thereby selecting against them over time? That's a testable question prompted by the memetic framework.
So the two ideas connect.
Yeah, the egregore metaphor and the meme metaphor are almost like two sides of the same coin. One speaks in the language of spirits and collective will, the other in the language of replicators and evolutionary fitness. But both converge on this core notion of something emergent, something that feels bigger than individual intent. They offer different but complementary lenses to view these complex digital phenomena.
Okay, we've looked at the ancient roots, the cultural evolution side with memes. Now, let's really get into the nuts and bolts. Let's talk about the machine learning, the socio-technical systems that form the very core of this potential algorithmic egregore. This is where the engineering really meets the emergent behavior.
Right. This domain gives us the technical understanding of how these collective phenomena aren't just, enabled by digital platforms, but are actively shaped by the specific design choices made within them. It really helps explain the how behind the what we observe. It reveals the mechanisms by which these algorithms mediate and often magnify collective attention.
So we know modern platforms rely heavily on recommender systems, ranking algorithms, all that stuff to personalize our content feeds. What's the fundamental piece of how they operate that drives this?
Well, one absolutely fundamental piece is the objective function. That's the goal the algorithm is told to maximize. And typically, it's some form of user engagement, click-through rate, watch time, time spent on platform, number of likes, shares, etc.
And that causes problems.
Stuart Russell and others point out a really critical problem here. If you tell a sufficiently advanced AI to maximize a simple metric, it might find unexpected, even undesirable ways to do so that fundamentally alter the environment, including us, the users. Russell goes so far as to suggest the algorithm effectively learns how to modify the user's mind, their preferences, their beliefs, to better achieve its own reward signal.
Modify our minds.
It sounds dramatic, but it essentially describes the algorithm acting as an agent with a goal. And there's empirical research showing that recommender systems do significantly influence user preferences over time. They don't just follow your taste, they actively nudge it.
Like YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube's algorithm has been studied quite a bit in this context. It's been shown sometimes pushing slightly more extreme or provocative content because, historically at least, the data often indicated that such content led to higher engagement, longer watch sessions.
And this is how we end up in filter bubbles and echo chambers, isn't it?
Exactly. An algorithm sees you like, say, content A. So it gives you more A. It might then start excluding content B, C, and D. This reinforces your preference for A, maybe makes you even more convinced A is the only right perspective until you're effectively isolated in an A bubble.
It's a positive feedback loop again.
It is. Initial interest leads to more recommendations of the same, which leads to deeper interest, which leads to even narrower recommendations. And many scholars are deeply concerned that these loops are contributing to societal polarization.
Has this been admitted?
There was a leaked internal Facebook study that explicitly stated, our recommendation systems grow the problem when talking about extremism. They found that algorithms pushing users towards potentially extreme groups significantly increased engagement for the platform.
Wow.
One internal memo even noted that after they rolled out some new recommendation features, certain extremist groups saw their membership grow by nearly 60% in just 1 month, with no new content being posted by the group itself. It was purely driven by algorithmic promotion finding susceptible users.
Just the algorithm feeding itself. That Goodhart's law you mentioned, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. That seems incredibly relevant here.
It's absolutely crucial. If platforms decide that maximizing clicks is the main goal, then the content itself will inevitably evolve to generate clicks, often at the expense of things like quality, nuance, or even truth.
Like clickbait.
Exactly. Clickbait headlines, outrageous claims, misleading thumbnails. These are all adaptations by content creators to the engagement metric the algorithm is optimizing for. The entire system can then drift over time to maximize that chosen metric. It's called optimization drift.
And YouTube showed this.
YouTube over the years definitely showed signs of this. Creators learned that provocative, maybe even slightly conspiratorial or outrageous content kept viewers hooked for longer. And the algorithm, being essentially blind to truth or quality, rewarded that content with more reach, more recommendations. This arguably led to a kind of platform-wide trend towards sensationalism. It's a systemic bias that emerges not from one single decision, but from millions of local optimizations, all pushing in the same direction towards maximizing engagement.
And these algorithms aren't static either, right? They're constantly adapting, learning in near real time. That sounds like it could easily create a rabbit hole effect.
That's exactly right. Many modern systems use techniques like reinforcement learning. So if showing you a slightly inflammatory post works, meaning you engage with it at time t, the algorithm learns that and might try it again. But maybe by time t plus delta, you're slightly desensitized. So to get the same level of engagement, the algorithm might have to escalate, showing you even stronger, more extreme content. This is the rabbit hole effect. It's been documented particularly on YouTube, where watching fairly mild conspiracy videos could lead to a cascade of recommendations for much more extreme ones.
How does that work technically?
The algorithm is essentially searching that fitness landscape we talked about, looking for peaks of engagement. And if it finds that extremity works, that moving in a certain direction on the content map increases engagement, it will naturally explore and potentially escalate around that region.
But surely users aren't entirely passive in all this. There must be some negative feedback loops, some way the system dampens itself down.
Oh, indeed. And that's important. Research does show that if a feed becomes too monotonous or maybe too extreme, some users do get bored or annoyed or even disturbed, and they disengage. They stop clicking, they close the app.
Like a thermostat kicking in.
Exactly. If it gets too hot, people stop stoking the fire. And platforms know this. They even intentionally inject things like serendipity, showing you something unexpected, or try to ensure some diversity in feeds, precisely to avoid overshooting and causing user fatigue or churn.
So it's not always a runaway train.
No, while extreme positive feedback is definitely possible, real systems often have these damping mechanisms, either through user choices or explicit design interventions by the platform. However, the equilibrium point the system settles at might still be a pretty stable echo chamber, just one that's balanced enough to retain its target users without pushing them away entirely.
What about when you have multiple algorithms interacting and different user groups all entwined? That sounds incredibly complex.
It is, and this leads to really complex emergent patterns that are often completely unpredictable from the outset. Computational social science really emphasizes this kind of emergence in aggregate behavior. Small, seemingly minor differences in initial conditions or algorithm parameters can sometimes be amplified into major systemic shifts.
Any examples?
Well, benign examples might include an obscure song suddenly becoming a global hit because TikTok's algorithm happened to pick it up and create a viral trend.
Right.
More malign examples could be small, fringe groups learning how to game the algorithm to promote harmful narratives much more widely than they could otherwise. These are the kinds of surprises you get when you have millions of humans interacting through these powerful AI-driven mediators.
So it's not all about just raw engagement. Some systems do try to incorporate other values.
Yes, and that's an area of active research and development,
Yeah.
especially for things like news recommenders, for instance. People are exploring how to optimize for things like viewpoint diversity or information quality, not just clicks.
But the pressure is still there.
Unchecked, yes. The market pressure, especially for ad-funded platforms, is overwhelmingly towards maximizing engagement because that ties so directly to revenue. And this inevitably leads back to those concerns we've discussed: echo chambers, polarization, potentially even radicalization, which is why many scholars are calling for systems that center things like transparency, fairness, and accountability in their design. The solution involves consciously adjusting the algorithm's objectives and constraints to try and prevent these harmful emergent outcomes.
Okay, so summing up this technical domain, Algorithms learn, they self-correct based on engagement data, creating these powerful feedback loops. And these loops can amplify human tendencies, maybe our follies, sometimes leading to really perverse outcomes where the proxy metric, like clicks, actually undermines the true goal, like providing meaningful or accurate content.
And crucially, in doing so, they often create the powerful appearance of agency. The algorithm behaves opportunistically, adapting its strategy to maximize its reward, almost like a clever parasite. The aggregate content feed that results can really seem to have a will of its own. My feed wants me to be angry today, or the algorithm is pushing this narrative.
Which brings it back to the metaphor.
Exactly. This is fertile ground for the egregore metaphor. It allows us to imagine the engagement algorithm as a kind of digital demon, perhaps summoned unintentionally by programmers through seemingly innocuous objective functions, which now incentivizes content that possesses the audience simply because that yields more engagement to these demons' lifeblood. It's a chilling image, maybe, but it feels quite apt for describing how human desires and machine optimization can combine to generate these unintended consequences that behave disturbingly like autonomous egregores shaping our collective reality.
Okay, we've built this foundation now, exploring the mystical roots, the memetic spread, the technical engine room. Now let's try and tie it all together. Let's get to the heart of the hypothesis, the step-by-step causal mechanism. How does human attention actually feed these algorithmic feedback loops, potentially leading to this emergent agency, the algorithmic egregore itself?
Right. This section aims to provide a really concrete, multi-stage model of that feedback cycle. It links human psychology, collective behavior online, and algorithmic curation together. It effectively operationalizes the egregore concept, showing step-by-step how it might form and then sustain itself through this continuous flow of data and influence.
Okay, let's break down this self-reinforcing loop into stages. What's the very first step? How does it start?
It really begins with ritualized user interaction. That's us. Humans engaging in repeated actions on these platforms, scrolling, reacting, posting content, sharing. Often this is driven by simple habit or social norms within a group, or maybe FOMO, fear of missing out.
Like checking TikTok every night.
Exactly. Think of maybe a group religiously sharing motivational memes every single morning. Or, yeah, a teenager's nightly TikTok routine. These patterned interactions, these rituals, provide consistent, predictable input data to the system. Things like time spent, click patterns, social graph connections, who interacts with whom.
Okay, so we provide the raw data through our habits. Then the algorithms take this data and what? Absorb it.
That's pretty much stage 2, algorithmic absorption and optimization. The platform's algorithms are continuously collecting all this behavioral data, and they treat our aggregate attention patterns as a signal, a guide for what to optimize for.
So if I watch a conspiracy video,
Right. If you linger on a conspiracy video, the recommender system notes that. And since its objective is usually engagement, it updates its internal model to favor similar content for you in the future, and maybe even for other users who seem similar to you.
it's searching that fitness landscape again.
Exactly. It's searching for those peaks where height represents user engagement, and is constantly steering towards them. And crucially, it also observes collective trends. If a particular hashtag is suddenly surging in popularity, the system is designed to boost it even further. It globalizes a local spark into a potential blaze, based on the logic, well, many people are engaging with this, so others probably will too.
And this leads to that customized feed for each of us, right? Stage 3.
Yes, stage 3 is the curated content feed, what you actually see. You receive a feed that's been shaped by the algorithm's learned preferences about you and about what's trending. And it's biased towards whatever the system predicts will keep you most engaged. Often that means more of the same kind of content you've already interacted with, or maybe slightly more extreme or novel variants of it.
And the effect of that.
Well, for individuals, this can mean ending up in that narrowing tunnel we talked about. Your YouTube homepage might gradually fill up with radical political rants, or your TikTok For You page becomes nothing but dancing nurses, whatever it is you engaged with. But for the collective, the algorithm can also cause a powerful herding effect. It funnels huge audiences towards just a few hot pieces of content, massively amplifying their reach and creating a shared experience or a dominant narrative across an entire community or even society.
And then stage 4, this curated content starts influencing us. Our beliefs, our actions.
That's stage 4, psychological and social impact. The content that's delivered back to us through these curated feeds can deeply influence our mental states, our beliefs, and importantly, our subsequent behavior.
That's so.
Well, a compelling, constantly reinforcing feed can obviously deepen convictions. Someone falling down a flat earth rabbit hole, guided by algorithmic suggestions, might become genuinely convinced and maybe even start producing their own content echoing those beliefs.
And social.
Socially, when many people in a network consume the same algorithm-driven content, they naturally start to form a kind of microculture around it. They discuss it, they share the inside jokes, the specific terminology, the memes propagate within that group. A community starts to coalesce around that content theme, whether it's something relatively innocuous like a specific TV show fandom, or something much more dangerous like a disinformation network that starts forming an online militia chat group.
And this is where the egregore, the entity, truly begins to form. Stage 5.
Precisely. Stage 5 is collective emergence, or what we're calling egregore formation. As the community engages more deeply in these shared, algorithmically mediated rituals around specific content, a coherent, almost entity-like collective behavior starts to emerge.
What does that look like?
The emergent properties might include things like apparent self-preservation, the group defending its core beliefs fiercely, maybe goal-directedness, like trying to recruit new members or coordinating to attack a perceived enemy, and predictable patterns of response, like the group reacting in unison to certain triggers.
And people describe it like an entity.
Often, yes. Individuals within these groups frequently describe the phenomenon in agentic terms. The algorithm keeps feeding us this stuff, or like with QAnon is like a living thing. It adapts every time a prophecy fails.
But technically,
What's likely happening is a massive alignment of thousands or millions of individuals' behavior, synchronized through shared information and feedback loops. It's a high degree of phase locking in the social system, mediated by the algorithm. We could potentially measure this by observing unusually high correlations in content consumption and production within that group, forming a very tightly clustered, often insular, network community. This signals a strongly emergent group mind, still explainable by the underlying interactions, but representing a genuinely new level of collective order.
and then this emergent structure, this egregore, feeds back into the loop, making it even stronger. The final stage.
Yes, the final stage is reinforcement and looping. Now, the emergent structure itself further feeds back into user interactions. Community members engage even more deeply within their specific content sphere. They might even start to actively game the algorithm to favor their group's content, like coordinated efforts to like and share specific posts at specific times to push them into the trending lists.
Manipulating the input.
Exactly. This drastically increases the signals the algorithm receives related to that content, causing it to double down, promoting it even more heavily. The loop is now fully closed and becomes self-sustaining. Human ritual feeds algorithm optimization, which curates content, reinforcing the ritual, which changes the humans, making them more aligned, more engaged members of the collective, which leads to even stronger signals for the algorithm. And round it goes.
Wow.
At this mature point, the algorithmic egregore fully manifests. It's this kind of unholy union of the algorithm's content strategy and the community's hyper-engaged, ritualized behavior, mutually reinforcing each other.
So the objective function that the algorithm is chasing, like watch time or clicks, is almost like the egregore's will, its driving force.
That's a really powerful way to put it, and it fits the model well. The engagement objective acts as the guiding force for the algorithm's behavior, almost like a ritual goal in itself. Users generate the raw material, the attention data. The objective function distills that data into a reward signal, which then drives the algorithm's choices about what to show next.
So you could stretch the analogy.
You could say the objective is what needs feeding. It demands more engagement. The algorithm is the egregore's brain, figuring out how to get fed.
Yeah.
And the users? Well, the users are its body, the ones who perform the feeding rituals and are, in turn, influenced and shaped by the entity they're sustaining.
Okay. That causal mechanism you laid out is incredibly detailed, and it paints a really vivid, almost chilling picture. But, our deep dive wouldn't be complete without considering the countermodel. How do we explain these same phenomena without invoking any mystical language, without using the term egregore? It's really important to ask. Can all of this be understood in purely scientific, maybe more conventional terms?
Absolutely. This is a crucial step for critical thinking. While the egregore metaphor is powerful because it captures the felt experience of these things, academic rigor demands that we explore explanations grounded purely in conventional social science and computational models. It forces us to question our assumptions.
So in plain terms, if we take the egregore metaphor away, what are we really talking about here?
Well, in a straightforward socio-technical model, what we're looking at is a complex adaptive system.
Hmm.
You have human agents and you have AI agents, the algorithms, interacting within a shared environment, the platform. Each human has a state, their beliefs, their preferences, their mood, and they take actions, clicks, watches, posts, shares. The platform algorithm takes those users' actions as input, along with other data, and selects content with the goal of maximizing some reward, like total clicks or watch time.
And it evolves.
Over time, yes, human states update in response to the content they see, and the algorithm updates its recommendation policy in response to the human actions it observes. Through these interactions, we might see patterns emerge, like clustering of states users segregating into distinct preference clusters or echo chambers, or maybe tipping points where small changes suddenly cause large cascades of behavior.
But no single entity.
In this model, no. There's no singular entity with a will. There are just many interacting parts. The apparent coherence, the feeling of an entity, is seen as an emergent pattern arising from highly correlated variables across the system.
So it's more like an ant colony, where
Right.
no single ant intends to build these complex tunnels and chambers, but their collective behavior, following simple local rules, leads to that complex structure emerging.
That's a very good analogy. Precisely. Users are following relatively simple incentives, liking or sharing what resonates with them, seeking social validation. Algorithms are following simple incentives, boosting content that gets engagement signals. And together, these simple local rules produce complex global effects, like maybe an anthill of collective attention focused on one topic, or tunnels of isolated communities who rarely interact.
So no ghost needed.
No egregore or ghost in the system is needed as an explanatory entity in this view. Its emergence purely from feedback mechanisms. And the advantage here is we can analyze the stability and the attractors of this human algorithm system using standard scientific tools.
What's an attractor in this context?
An attractor might be a stable state the system tends towards. For example, a state where a large portion of users believe conspiracy X could be an attractor if believing X makes users engage more, which causes the algorithm to show more X-related content, which converts more users to believing X until you reach a stable cluster of believers.
So this countermodel frames the whole issue more as unintended consequences, rather than some kind of conscious or spooky will driving things.
Yes, exactly. Nobody necessarily programmed the system with the goal of creating a conspiracy movement or a dangerous viral challenge. It emerged from the interaction of local rules. And this perspective emphasizes testable, falsifiable predictions.
Like what?
For instance, you could hypothesize, if we significantly reduce or remove algorithmic recommendations for a specific group Y, will the observed extremism within that group diminish? If the answer is yes, then the feedback loop hypothesis is supported. If the answer is no, then maybe purely social dynamics, independent of the algorithm, are sufficient to explain it.
That's important.
Yeah, it's crucial to remember that people can and do self-radicalize or form intense group identities even without aggressive algorithms pushing them. The algorithm might just accelerate or amplify existing tendencies.
Okay, so by avoiding the metaphor, we avoid anthropomorphizing, which is good for science. But what do we potentially lose by ditching the egregore idea entirely?
We might lose some of the intuitive grasp on the qualitative feel of these phenomena. That powerful sense people often report of an emergent will, of something taking over. Science aims for objective explanation, but sometimes metaphors help us grapple with the lived experience.
And how would science try to disprove the egregore idea?
Well, scientifically, we'd aim to falsify the egregore hypothesis by demonstrating that everything attributed to its supposed agency can actually be fully explained by individual-level incentives, network structure, and algorithmic amplification alone. For example, if removing one central, highly influential user causes an entire online movement to collapse, that would suggest it was more top-down leadership, not a truly self-sustaining bottom-up egregore.
Or if changing the algorithm kills it instantly.
Exactly. Or it's simply tweaking the algorithm's objective function immediately causes the collective behavior to change drastically. That would imply the supposed entity had no independent agency or momentum of its own. It was entirely dependent on the algorithm's current settings. These are the kinds of critical considerations we need to keep in mind when we look at concrete cases.
Right, let's do that now. Let's bring these complex ideas down to earth with some real-world examples. These case studies seem to perfectly illustrate how these dynamics, user rituals, algorithmic feedback, emergent group agency can play out. This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Yes, these cases provide pretty vivid evidence, or at least illustrations, of the causal mechanisms we've been discussing. They show just how varied the manifestations of these potential algorithmic egregores can be, ranging from really dark conspiracies to almost playful online cults. And their impact can be significant, affecting everything from social cohesion to financial markets.
Okay, first up, QAnon, the conspiracy that really seemed to take on a life of its own. What were the specific user rituals involved here?
QAnon provides a stark example. It began, as you know, on fringe message boards, with these cryptic drops from the anonymous figure Q. A core ritual quickly developed among followers. The collective effort to decode these drops, treating them almost like sacred texts.
The research.
Exactly, doing the research, and then spreading their interpretations across mainstream social media. Daily, followers would check for new posts, they'd share sympathetic YouTube videos, they'd actively try to recruit friends and family, red-pilling them. This repetitive, almost devotional engagement generated massive amounts of content and interaction data.
Feeding the algorithm.
Precisely. In Facebook groups, for instance, members were posting constantly, liking theories, commenting, creating huge signals for Facebook's algorithms that this topic generated high engagement. They also adopted common symbols and catchphrases like WWG1WGA, where we go one, we go all, which functioned almost like mantras, reinforcing group identity.
And the feedback dynamics, the algorithmic side, were crucial to its explosion, right?
Absolutely crucial. Platforms like Facebook and YouTube, at least initially, treated QAnon content as just another highly engaging topic cluster. The Guardian actually found evidence that Facebook's algorithms were actively recommending QAnon groups to users who might not otherwise have been exposed to them. How did that work? It could happen through collaborative filtering. People who liked Group X also liked QAnon Group Y. Joining even unrelated conspiracy groups could apparently lead you down a path towards QAnon suggestions. And we know from those leaked internal Facebook notes they admitted, our recommendation systems grow the problem. They saw that 60% membership growth in some QAnon groups in 1 month without any new Q posts, indicating it was purely algorithmic virality finding new recruits.
Can YouTube too?
YouTube had similar issues, with documented cases of the algorithm nudging users from relatively benign conspiracy videos towards more hardcore QAnon-related content. Each new recruit generated more engagement data, which made the algorithms recommend QAnon even more widely. There's a classic accelerating feedback loop.
So, did this lead to actual entity-like behavior from the QAnon movement itself? Did it start acting like an egregore?
Well, by mid-2020, you could argue that QAnon was functioning like a cohesive, almost biological organism. It had mechanisms for ingesting new information, hashtags, news events reinterpreted through the Q lens. It had defense mechanisms, complex reinterpretations whenever prophecies failed, dismissing criticism as fake news. And it had offense mechanisms, coordinated harassment campaigns against perceived enemies.
And believers felt guided.
Many believers explicitly spoke about Q as a guiding entity, providing direction and purpose. The algorithmic amplification essentially filled a coordinating role that might otherwise have required centralized leadership. It continuously brought believers together, reinforced their shared worldview, and helped them self-organize. You could say the egregore of QAnon was co-created by the collective fervor of believers and the amplifying feedback loops of the platforms. And it showed remarkable adaptability and resilience, mutating keywords to avoid moderation, migrating across different platforms when kicked off mainstream ones.
Which raises that tricky question again.
Right. How do we distinguish between genuine bottom-up collective will and what might be, to some extent, an algorithmically amplified and steered delusion? It's not always easy to draw that line.
The ethical implications there are just stark.
They really are. You had a situation where largely unfettered recommender systems arguably helped midwife and massively scale a dangerous collective delusion, one that directed people towards increasingly extreme beliefs and ultimately even towards real-world actions like the January 6th Capitol riot. Facebook researchers themselves reportedly lamented creating a monster, and when platforms finally tried to purge QAnon content, it was almost like trying to exorcise an egregore that had already spread and mutated, transcending its initial host platforms.
Okay, let's shift gears. Next, a fascinating case from the financial world. Meme stocks like GameStop, GME. This one truly felt like a collective frenzy, almost a mania.
Yes, GameStop is a fantastic case study because it combines financial markets with these intense, mimetic, almost cult-like group dynamics. The user rituals here were incredibly powerful and explicit.
Like what?
You had the constant repetition of mantras: buy and hold, diamond hands, apes together strong. There was the veneration of symbols like rocket emojis, like ape pictures, and the adherence to a core narrative prophecy, the coming Moas, or mother of all short squeezes.
And the social dynamics?
Retail investors on platforms like Reddit's or Wall Street Bets would post screenshots of their trades, often showing huge risky positions. They'd cheer each other on, and importantly, they'd shame anyone who sold the paper hands. This built an incredibly strong ape-nation identity. Their coordinated buying and, crucially, holding of the stock, even when it seemed irrational based on fundamentals or when facing losses, became a ritualistic act of faith, feeding the central idea, sustained largely by social pressure and belief in the collective. Memes were actively weaponized to reinforce resolve and attract new adherents to the cause.
So in this case, we had dual algorithms for feeding the loop, right? Social media algorithms and market or trading platform algorithms.
Absolutely, that's a key point. Social media algorithms on Reddit, Twitter, even TikTok picked up the massive surge in GameStop chatter, making it a top trending topic globally. This exposed huge numbers of people outside the initial Reddit community to the phenomenon.
And the news jumped on it.
Right. News media algorithms also started featuring the story prominently, creating this intense feedback loop between mainstream coverage and social media hype. Reddit's own upvote system pushed Wall Street Bets posts to its front page, luring in millions of new, curious users. This massive influx boosted engagement signals even further, causing Wall Street Bets to explode from maybe 1–2 million members to over 8 million in just a few days, largely driven by algorithmic visibility across multiple platforms.
Depends on the trading side.
On the trading side, the collective action of buying and holding actually did start to bend the market, causing the stock price to soar astronomically. This price action itself then generated even more talk, more hype. Trading apps like Robinhood listed GameStop as a top mover, which acted as another algorithmic signal, enticing even more users to jump in, often out of pure FOMO, fear of missing out. It was a clear, powerful, positive feedback loop, until external intervention, like Robinhood restricting buying, threw a wrench in the works.
And participants really talked about it like it was an entity, right? Something acting in the market.
They absolutely did. People talked about the GameStop saga as if it were an almost sentient force playing out. The Wall Street Bets community itself displayed many attributes of a collective agent. It set a clear mission: hold the line against the hedge funds, often explicitly against individual rational financial interests.
The language they used.
The language like, "We like the stock, we are never leaving," showed this palpable sense of joint will, of collective determination. When Robinhood halted buying, the narrative immediately adapted, portraying it as proof the elites were spared, which only strengthened the collective resolve for many. And the mimetic nature meant the phenomenon quickly spread, amoeba-like, to other meme stocks like AMC. This self-fulfilling agency, where the group's belief and actions literally create the market reality they desire, is a classic example of George Soros's concept of market reflexivity in hyperdrive.
So it was this powerful, positive feedback loop that just kept going until external limits were hit, like brokers stepping in.
Exactly. You could call it the meme stock egregore. It was fueled by a potent mix of genuine resentment towards Wall Street, pandemic boredom, maybe some stimulus money, and this powerful rebellious narrative. And the algorithms across social media and trading platforms acted as potent accelerants. It had incredibly high mimetic fitness for a brief period, but eventually hit environmental limits, regulatory scrutiny, breaker interventions, market mechanics.
But the feeling was real.
What was so striking was how participants often described the experience in almost mystical or uncanny terms. It was insane how everyone just knew not to sell. It felt, to many involved, like a shared hive mind moment, a singular entity acting with unified purpose in the market frenzy, which is precisely why terms like cult were so often thrown around by observers.
Okay, let's look at a third, maybe more culturally driven example: fan culture feedback, like K-pop stans and their legendary online coordination, sometimes even leading to fandom wars.
Yes, K-pop fan communities, often called stans, are renowned for their intense, highly coordinated online activities. The rituals here are very explicit and organized.
Like streaming parties.
Exactly. You have stream parties designed to inflate view counts for new music videos, often meticulously scheduled to hit specific targets, like 100 million views in the first 24 hours. They coordinate massive hashtag campaigns on platforms like Twitter, tweeting things like hashtag group name comeback millions of times in a short period.
It's very deliberate.
These actions are explicitly ritualized, often with a real sense of ceremony and collective effort. They learn to treat platform algorithms, like Twitter's trending algorithm, almost like a game they need to win. They develop sophisticated tactics to get their hashtags trending, even adapting their rituals in real time to try and outwit the algorithm's rules designed to prevent manipulation, like requiring novelty.
And how do the algorithms respond to this? How do they reward this kind of behavior?
Well, the platforms often inadvertently reward this highly coordinated behavior. When a fandom successfully trends a hashtag, the platform's own systems often spotlight it further. Look what's trending. This draws in more attention from outside the fandom, signaling something important is happening here, which creates a snowball effect.
So the fans feel validated.
Right. The fan groups see influxes of mentions, maybe new recruits, reinforcing the perception that their coordinated rituals work. On YouTube, mass streaming directly boosts view counts, which the algorithm, at least historically, hasn't easily differentiated from purely organic views. A video pushed by a streaming party can then rise onto the main trending lists, exposing it to millions of neutral users, potentially converting some into new fans. The algorithm essentially amplifies the initial coordinated push made by the dedicated fans.
And this can lead to almost warlike, or at least highly competitive, entity-like behavior between different fandoms. You even mentioned it being used for social good sometimes.
Absolutely. Fandoms are very often referred to in the singular. People say, the Army BTS fans is doing this, or the Blackpink fans are mobilizing. They experience an incredibly strong sense of collective identity, often behaving like a single entity with shared desires and duties. We need to get our boys this award, or we have to defend our girls from the haters.
It sounds intense.
The level of coordination can reach astonishing levels of discipline. It's often self-organized through large fan accounts on social media that signal commands or strategies for streaming or voting or hashtagging. The fandom's emergent goals are pursued with real zeal, often with individuals sacrificing sleep or time for the collective aim. The fandom acts like a kind of digital superorganism with rapid information flow and collective moves.
And the social good example.
Yes, interestingly, K-pop fans famously mobilized to flood racist hashtags like hashtag White Lives Matter with fan cams short clips of their idols dancing or singing. This effectively confused Twitter's algorithm into categorizing the hashtag as K-pop related, burying the original hateful content and defanging its use. That was a clear example of emergent collective agency being wielded, in that case for social good, disrupting a harmful trend.
So these fandom egregores, if we call them that, can actually push real-world outcomes. They have tangible effects.
Oh, absolutely. Things like music chart rankings, winning fan-voted awards, dominating trending topics, setting streaming records. These are economically and culturally significant outcomes. They learn to literally bend the algorithm to their collective will, demonstrating their power through these algorithmic victories. To an outsider, a hyper-coordinated fandom in action can look quite uncanny, almost like an invisible crowd suddenly shouting in perfect unison online. That feeling is, arguably, what it's like to encounter an algorithmically mediated egregore in the wild.
TikTok's designed the short video format, TikTok cults, and viral challenges. This platform sounds like an absolute egregore factory.
TikTok's designed the short video format, the powerful For You page algorithm, the ease of remixing and imitation makes it almost perfectly suited for creating rapidly rising, often very strange, collective trends. One early phenomenon was the step chicken.
Right, I remember them.
It was this massive fan community that formed around a creator, Melissa Ong, who humorously called her followers a cult. The rituals were simple but effective. Everyone changed their profile picture to the same image of her. They participated in comment raids, flooding the comment sections of popular videos with inside jokes or just the chicken emoji.
What was the point?
It was partly a memetic game, partly about recruiting new members, partly about bonding through shared, slightly absurd action. Other similar micro-cults popped up, often centered around uniform profile pictures like Blue Lemons or anime characters, and signature phrases. It was like playing at community formation with minimal effort, mediated by the platform.
And TikTok's algorithm, the FYP, played a huge role in their spread, presumably.
A massive role. TikTok's algorithm is incredibly good at identifying content that generates rapid high engagement. When the step chickens reached a certain critical mass, the TikTok algorithm started surfacing Melissa Ong's content and content about the step chickens to vastly more people because it was getting tons of interaction, likes, comments, shares, profile views.
How big did it get?
Videos tagged #stepchickens eventually hit hundreds of millions of views. The distinct visual cue of the identical blue profile picture likely boosted comment activity as people asked, "What is this?" People who were curious about these TikTok cults watched explainer videos, which the algorithm then fed to even more users who seemed interested in similar trends. It created this classic feedback loop. More people joined the cult, they engaged more, TikTok highlighted the trend more, which brought in even more recruits, and Melissa Ong's follower count exploded virtually overnight.
But this dynamic can also produce much more harmful entity-like behaviors, right? Like the devious lick challenge.
Yes, unfortunately. TikTok's algorithm facilitates incredibly fast viral cascades. If a challenge starts trending, even a harmful one, the algorithm is designed to spread it widely and quickly to maximize engagement. Users then ritualistically repeat the challenge, filming themselves doing it, which further strengthens the trend signal for the algorithm.
So the devious lick.
The Devious Lick Challenge, where students were stealing or vandalizing school property and posting videos of it, went viral exactly this way. Initial posts somehow blew up, teenagers across the country started imitating it for clout, TikTok's algorithm promoted related videos because they were getting views and engagement, until schools and authorities had to intervene. The user ritual of performing mischievous, sometimes criminal, acts for online validation was absolutely egged on by the algorithm seeking engagement, creating this nationwide emergent crime waves, something definitely not intended by any single individual user or even by TikTok itself.
It often feels like TikTok trends lack a clear initiator, doesn't it? It feels more like the algorithm just decided everyone should see this specific dance or challenge this week.
Exactly. Trends seem to arrive and depart almost mysteriously, out of nowhere sometimes. This definitely lends itself to that entity-driven view. TikTok wants me to do this dance, or the algorithm is pushing this sound. Even purely algorithm-generated or discovered content, like that creepy AI-generated face called Lobe, which became the basis for a collaborative, scary story meme on TikTok, that can form the nucleus of an egregore-like narrative, a modern myth built collectively by users interacting with the platform's uncanny ability to surface strange connections. So TikTok really is an egregore factory. You could certainly argue that. It seems uniquely capable of pulling millions of users into these states of unconscious collective sync, often producing fascinating, sometimes disturbing emergent collective behaviors or even characters, like the crowdsourced Ratatouille musical phenomenon. That was a remarkable example of emergent collaboration, guided almost entirely by the algorithm connecting disparate contributions.
These cases really do show the different flavors of these algorithmic egregores, don't they? From the dark and political with QAnon to the financially frenzied with GameStop, the culturally powerful with K-pop fans, and the rapidly emergent, sometimes absurd or harmful trends on TikTok. But they all seem to share those core elements: user rituals, algorithmic amplification, and some form of emergent group agency. Okay, those case studies are incredibly compelling. They paint a really powerful picture of these potential algorithmic egregores in action. But, as critical thinkers, it's really crucial that we step back here. Is this metaphor maybe too powerful? Is it seductive? How can we scrutinize it properly under a scientific lens? And crucially, are there perfectly good alternative explanations that can account for these phenomena without needing to resort to this mystical sounding language?
Yes, this section is absolutely vital for maintaining intellectual honesty. While the egregore metaphor is illuminating, especially for capturing the experience, it absolutely must be subjected to rigorous critique. It's really about distinguishing between a compelling narrative and a robust scientific explanation, and recognizing where the metaphor might actually mislead us.
So first off, how could we actually falsify this egregore hypothesis? If we were trying to disprove it scientifically, what specific predictions would need to fail?
Okay, that's a great question. One way to formulate a falsifiable prediction might be this. If an algorithmic egregore possesses truly emergent agency, independent of its parts, then removing or significantly altering one key component, like the human mass participating, or the specific algorithmic promotion driving it, should not cause the collective behavior to immediately dissipate entirely. It should, theoretically, try to find expression elsewhere or persist for a time due to its own momentum.
Like QAnon moving to other platforms.
Exactly. The fact that QAnon seemed to reconstitute itself, albeit perhaps in a weaker form, on platforms like Gab and Telegram after being deplatformed from mainstream sites, could be seen as weak evidence for some persistent entity. Conversely, if a movement completely dies the moment a few key influential accounts are banned, that would suggest it was more reliant on top-down leadership, not an independent emergent force.
Any other tests?
Another test could be, does the collective exhibit consistent goals or behaviors that persist, even as the individual membership changes significantly over time? Did the hold-the-line ethos of the meme stock phenomenon outlast many of the initial traders who started it? If yes, that might hint at a super-individual agenda. We can also try to measure if the system-level outcomes are truly irreducible to the sum of individual intentions. If almost everyone involved says, I didn't intend for X to happen, yet X happens consistently at the collective level, like widespread radicalization, that points towards genuine emergence.
Okay, what are the main critiques people level against using the egregore metaphor itself?
Well, a primary critique is simply that the term egregore unnecessarily anthropomorphizes and mystifies what are fundamentally just complex interactions between human behaviors and machine operations. A hard skeptic would say there's no need for a ghost in the data.
So QAnon is just people and networks.
They'd argue QAnon's growth can be perfectly well explained using standard concepts. Social network diffusion theory, confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, sophisticated propaganda techniques, and operating within a permissive or even amplifying media ecosystem. In this view, algorithms are just powerful amplifiers, maybe qualitatively different in their targeting, but not fundamentally different in principle from the influence of mass broadcast TV in the past. People might just use the algorithm as a convenient shorthand because parsing the interactions of millions of microactions is simply too complex for our brains.
And could using this metaphor lead to a kind of fatalism, or maybe an abdication of responsibility?
That's a very real danger, yes. If we start saying things like, the egregore made me do it, or the algorithm is controlling people, we risk absolving individuals of their choices, or, perhaps more importantly, absolving companies of their crucial design decisions.
Because there are real actors involved.
Absolutely. There are stakeholders with clear agency here. Engineers choose the objective functions and design the systems. Creators make decisions about what content to produce, sometimes choosing sensationalism. Users make choices, however influenced, about what they click on and share. Sociologically, you could frame QAnon primarily as an outgrowth of pre-existing social distrust, maybe exacerbated by specific media outlets and political agitators, with algorithms pouring gasoline on the fire but not starting it. This raises that critical question. How do we ensure accountability if we start attributing agency to some emergent, disembodied entity?
So what are some of these alternative explanations that work without metaphysics? What terms would a sociologist or computer scientist use?
They'd likely use terms like collective behavior, crowd psychology, which goes way back, bandwagon effects, information cascades, or network externalities. These concepts from sociology, economics, and network science can cover much of the observed phenomena without implying any separate will or entity.
Like de Bono's work on crowds.
Exactly. Gustave Le Bon's work from 1895 on the crowd, supposedly having a mind of its own, is essentially describing the egregore concept, but long before algorithms. He explained it through psychological mechanisms like suggestibility and the anonymity people feel in a crowd. You could argue that modern internet phenomena are just the same dynamics playing out at an unprecedented scale and speed, with technology amplifying and accelerating the crowd formation process.
And that distinction between weak and strong emergence seems relevant here again, doesn't it?
Very relevant. Philosophers of science might argue that everything we're calling emergent agency here is actually just weak emergence, meaning, while it might look surprising, it's ultimately still derivable and explainable from the micro-level rules and interactions. It's not strong emergence, which would imply something fundamentally new with independent causal powers coming into existence.
So the egregore isn't real in that sense.
In this view, the egregore has no independent ontological status. It's an epiphenomenon, a pattern arising from the underlying interactions. Methodological individualists would insist that all macro-level behavior must ultimately be traceable back to individual actions and motivations, however complex the aggregation. The algorithm doesn't want to maximize engagement. It simply executes code designed to do so. The emergent movement doesn't will anything. It's an aggregation of its members' wills, perhaps misguided by cognitive biases and amplified by the network structure.
So maybe we're stretching the definition of agency too far when we apply it here.
That's a strong argument. True agency, arguably, requires things like intention, understanding, perhaps consciousness. An algorithm, by design, has a fixed goal set by its programmers. A crowd, even a digitally mediated one, usually lacks a single coherent long-term intention. The Step Chickens cult on TikTok, for example, largely dissolved once the initial joke or novelty ran its course. That suggests no independent agentic entity existed beyond the creator's content and the platform's trend dynamics. It points towards weak agency, at best.
What about focusing on power dynamics or broader sociological factors instead?
Yes, alternative explanations for these case studies often emphasize structural forces. QAn's spread can be linked to failures of trust in institutions, political polarization, and deliberate disinformation campaigns, with algorithms acting as powerful accelerators but not the sole cause. The meme stock phenomenon happened due to a specific confluence of market conditions, stimulus checks, pandemic boredom, the rise of zero-fee trading apps combined with a potent anti-establishment narrative.
Fandom wars existed before Twitter.
Exactly. Intense fandom rivalries certainly existed long before algorithms. The technology just provides new tools for coordination and amplification. And TikTok trends can be largely explained by an algorithmic design that heavily rewards imitation and operates on extremely short feedback loops. We can build models for these things using tools from epidemiology for spread, econometrics for market behavior, and social network analysis. If these conventional models can predict the observed outcomes reasonably well, then the egregore concept, while evocative, might be more poetic than scientifically necessary.
So is this phenomenon truly novel, or is it just, old wine in new bottles, but with terrifying new scale and speed?
That's a really good way to frame the debate. Crowds have rioted, markets have panicked, cults have formed throughout history, all without algorithms. The undeniable X factor today is the scale, potentially billions of people networked almost instantly, and the speed feedback cycles operating in seconds or minutes, not days or weeks. The egregore metaphor might simply be our human way of grappling with this drastically amplified scale and speed. When millions of people seem to act in unison almost overnight, it feels inhuman, like something else is directing it.
Maybe it's just aggregation.
One could argue, quite plausibly, there is no egregore, just 1 million people making simultaneous small choices, influenced by the information they receive, that aggregate up to produce large, sometimes unexpected effects. The aggregate result feels inscrutable, maybe even intentional, but theoretically it's just a very large, complex, causal mesh.
Okay, so finally, what are the main misleading aspects of using this metaphor? Where does it potentially lead us astray?
Well, first, it risks encouraging a kind of techno-determinism or fatalism. The idea that algorithms inevitably produce these digital demons, and we can't control them. This obscures the reality of human agency and design choices. We know platforms can modify their algorithms. YouTube tweaked its system to reduce recommendations of borderline content, showing these outcomes are malleable. Second, it can obscure accountability. An algorithm is built and deployed by a company, often with specific goals in mind. We can't just throw up our hands and say a demon did it when harms occur. Third, the metaphor might over-unify very disparate phenomena. A K-pop fandom egregore, however intense, operates very differently and has different consequences than a violent extremist cell fostered online. Lumping them together under one spooky term might hinder clear analysis and the development of tailored solutions. And lastly, it could potentially scapegoat technology for deeper, pre-existing social issues like ideological divides, economic grievances, or political polarization, distracting us from addressing those root causes.
Okay, that's a really important set of cautions.
So, in conclusion on skepticism, the algorithmic egregore is a powerful metaphor. It's useful for dramatizing these emergent collective behaviors we're witnessing. It corresponds to measurable phenomena like feedback loops, network effects, and self-organization. It brilliantly illuminates the felt experience and the qualitative gestalt of encountering a runaway collective force online. But we absolutely must keep it contained as a useful shorthand, a conceptual tool, and be ready to drop it in favor of more precise, mechanistic explanations when we're actually trying to analyze causes or devise solutions. It highlights the urgency and the sheer uncanniness of it all, but it can definitely mislead if we take it too literally or use it as an excuse for inevitability or inaction.
Okay, so if these feedback-driven emergent entities are indeed arising, whether we choose to call them egregores or just complex adaptive systems behaving strangely, the big question becomes, what can we or what should we do about it? What are the ethical considerations, the governance challenges, and how might we actually try to tame or at least coexist more safely with these powerful digital forces?
Right. The rise of these algorithmically mediated collective behaviors undeniably poses significant ethical and governance challenges. The effects we see things like mass manipulation, the amplification of extremism, new forms of online mobbing or harassment. These are very real and can have severe consequences. It really highlights our collective responsibility, arguably, to design and manage these systems in ways that are more likely to foster collective angels, you could say, rather than inadvertently unleashing digital demons.
Let's break down the ethical risks first. Misinformation and radicalization seem like the most obvious ones, especially after the QAnon example.
Absolutely. As we saw with QAnon, algorithms optimizing purely for engagement can inadvertently lead vast numbers of people to believe dangerously false things. This can undermine democratic processes, erode trust in institutions, and lead to real-world harm, whether it's related to public health, political violence, or social cohesion.
Because they optimize for clicks, not truth.
Exactly. They optimize for engagement, not accuracy or truthfulness, and this can lead to these perverse outcomes, where misinformation or extremist content spreads like wildfire simply because it's provocative and keeps people hooked. The emergent egregore of misinformation effectively hijacks people's epistemology, their process of knowing what's true. This also creates a difficult responsibility gap, because the harmful outcome is emergent, not directly intended by any single actor. Yet the platforms clearly play a significant causal role in enabling and amplifying it. What about the risk to autonomy and manipulation? If algorithms are, as Stuart Russell suggested, learning to modify the user's mind, isn't that a fundamental violation of our free will? This raises incredibly deep ethical concerns. Users generally think they're freely choosing what to watch or read or believe online. But in aggregate, their behavior is being subtly nudged, shaped, and steered toward fulfilling corporate KPIs, like maximizing ad revenue, which may not align at all with their own well-being or goals.
Our autonomy is at stake.
The core ethical principle of respect for individual autonomy is definitely at stake here. The egregore metaphor paints a picture of users being ensnared or possessed. More tangibly, we're talking about the effects of highly sophisticated persuasive technology and behavioral nudging operating at massive scale. Excessive, opaque algorithmic influence could certainly be seen as a violation of autonomy, potentially even becoming a public health issue if it leads to widespread addiction, mental health problems, or radicalization.
And then there's the amplification of harmful content more broadly.
Yes. Beyond just misinformation, these engagement-driven collectives can amplify other types of harmful content, hate speech, coordinated harassment campaigns, content promoting self-harm or dangerous behaviors, like the Devious Lick Challenge. The egregore in this case might be a toxic online community that reinforces destructive norms and behaviors among its members. The ethical dilemma here involves balancing principles like free expression with the known tendency of unchecked feedback loops in large online systems to breed toxicity and amplify harm.
Does treating the collective as an entity cause problems here?
It can. If you start treating the collective, like a DAO or an online mob, as if it has rights or agency, you risk ignoring the rights and the harms experienced by the individuals who might be targeted or damaged by that collective's actions.
It also feels like there's a potential loss of individual reason within these hyper-ritualized, algorithmically orchestrated groups. People just follow the herd.
That's a definite concern. Individuals may increasingly outsource their critical judgment, whether it's making financial decisions based on meme hype without due diligence, or joining an online dogpile against someone simply because their feed is full of people doing it.
Yeah.
Herd behavior isn't new, of course, but the scale, speed, and precision of algorithmic targeting are unprecedented.
Are we inhibiting critical thinking?
The question is, are we inadvertently creating digital environments that systematically inhibit critical thinking on a societal level? The egregore metaphor captures this with the idea that the collective mind takes over the individual. And that becomes ethically very worrisome if that collective mind is detached from reality, lacks empathy, or is driven by harmful impulses.
So if these harms are emergent, who is actually accountable? Accountability and legal responsibility seem incredibly murky.
They really do. You can't exactly put an egregore on trial, right? If a meme stock frenzy causes significant market turmoil and financial losses, or if an online cult fostered by algorithms leads to real-world self-harm, who is legally responsible?
Normally, it's individuals or companies.
Exactly. But emergent phenomena really muddies these waters. Should the platforms be held accountable for the reasonably foreseeable emergent harms that their systems enable or amplify, like facilitating dangerous viral challenges among minors? This is a huge area of legal and regulatory debate right now. Initiatives like the EU's Digital Services Act, DSA, are starting to assert platform responsibility for mitigating these kinds of systemic risks. This effectively treats the platform as the handler or keeper of the potential egregore, placing a duty on them to keep it in check.
Okay, so there are clearly significant risks, but we're not powerless here. What are some concrete intervention strategies or levers we could actually pull? How
Yeah.
could we manage this?
That's the crucial question. And yes, we are not powerless. Perhaps the most direct lever is objective function reform. If we know that maximizing simple metrics like raw watch time or clicks creates toxic feedback loops, then we need to move towards more complex, multi-objective optimization.
What would that look like?
It means building algorithms that also consider factors like user well-being, information quality, viewpoint diversity, or maybe reduction of polarization. YouTube, for example, has claimed to shift towards optimizing for responsible watch time or satisfaction, trying to penalize misleading content or extreme binge-watching patterns, even if they generate raw engagement. Shifting the goal from just raw engagement to something like meaningful engagement should, in theory, change the emergent patterns.
But Goodhart's law still applies.
It does. It warns us that any new metric can potentially be gamed. But consciously incorporating human values into the objective function is likely a necessary step.
What about slowing things down, introducing friction and throttling?
Yes, that's another key strategy. Introducing friction into the system can act as a powerful damper on runaway feedback loops. We saw examples like Twitter adding that prompt, "Want to read the article before retweeting," which apparently did decrease blind retweets. WhatsApp limited message forwarding to slow down viral misinformation.
Like speed bumps for information.
Exactly. These act as speed bumps. For recommender systems, things like imposing rate limits on how quickly certain types of content can spread, or enforcing diversity requirements in feeds so you don't just see one thing, act as friction. You could even imagine automated circuit breakers that temporarily pause the spread of content that's going viral incredibly quickly, especially on sensitive topics, allowing time for human review. The design goal is to prevent unchecked positive feedback from spiraling out of control. Another vital lever is transparency and auditability. We need more light shed on how these systems work.
How would that help?
Making algorithms, or at least their effects, more visible to independent researchers, regulators, and maybe even users themselves helps us detect potential harms much earlier. Facebook, for example, now allows some vetted researchers access to data about content distribution on its platform. We should ideally be monitoring the behavior of major platform algorithms, almost like public health indicators. Imagine a public virality dashboard that shows which topics or narratives are spiking suddenly.
And for users?
For users, simply explaining why they are seeing a particular piece of content. You are seeing this because you follow X, and many people who watch X also watch Y, can help re-inject conscious awareness and potentially break the hypnotic spell of the curated feed. Now, transparency has limits. Malicious actors could try to exploit it to game the system even more effectively. But generally, more openness should help society understand and build countermeasures.
User empowerment and literacy also seem absolutely vital here. It can't all be top-down.
Definitely not. Governance isn't just about platforms changing or regulators stepping in. Platforms could and should offer users more meaningful controls, like the ability to easily reset their recommendation profile, or opt out of personalization entirely for sensitive topics like health or politics.
And education.
User education is key, teaching people, starting from a young age, how algorithms work, how they exploit attention biases, can help instill healthy skepticism and more mindful usage patterns. Even the egregore metaphor itself, used carefully, could be pedagogically useful in media literacy. Be careful what you feed the algorithmic demon. It's a visceral reminder that every click, every share reinforces some pattern. And then, of course, there's the more brute force method, moderation and removal of harmful content or actors.
Does that work?
Banning accounts or downranking harmful content, as platforms eventually did with QAnon, certainly dampens the mainstream reach of those movements. It cuts off the easy recruitment pathways. But, as we saw, the hardcore believers often just regroup elsewhere, maybe on less moderated platforms, creating these fractured egregores lurking in darker corners of the internet. So, there's an ongoing debate. Does oppression just make the problem harder to observe and study, or is it a necessary containment strategy for the most harmful manifestations?
Is there a middle ground?
A more nuanced approach gaining traction is demotion rather than outright removal. This means stopping the algorithmic promotion of borderline or problematic content. making it findable if you actively search for it, perhaps, but not actively thrusting it into people's recommendations. YouTube found this significantly reduced views of such content without invoking censorship concerns quite as strongly.
What about more systemic changes, like offering algorithmic choice and competition? Could that help?
That's a really interesting idea. It suggests giving users, or perhaps society more broadly, more say in how the algorithms that shape their information environment actually work. Maybe this means allowing users to choose from different recommendation algorithms offered by the platform, or even allowing third-party algorithms to plug into the platform, like different web browsers.
Why would that help?
The thinking is, if an egregore is partly a function of a single, dominant, engagement-maximizing algorithm creating a monoculture, then introducing algorithmic diversity might help prevent these massive, synchronized feedback loops. Imagine being able to easily toggle between the default engagement-optimized feed and a chronological feed, or a serendipity feed, or a verified news sources feed.
But would people choose the healthier option?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Would users, if given the choice, actually opt for a less addictive but potentially more balanced or informative feed? Or would the allure of the engagement-optimized feed win out? It raises important questions about user behavior and platform incentives. And finally, inevitably perhaps, we have regulatory oversight. Governments are increasingly stepping in.
Like the EU's DSA.
Exactly. The EU's Digital Services Act is a major example. It requires large online platforms to actively assess and mitigate systemic risks arising from their services, including the potential for algorithmic amplification of harmful content or manipulation. This effectively mandates that platforms try to exercise or at least control the worst potential egregores if they threaten the public interest. We might see large recommender systems increasingly treated like critical public infrastructure or utilities that require independent oversight.
But it's legally tricky.
It's very tricky. How do you legally pin blame for an emergent outcome on a specific platform decision? It likely requires new legal theories, or perhaps demonstrating negligence in anticipating and mitigating foreseeable harms caused by their system design.
Now, it's not just about preventing harm, is it? Can we also think about actively fostering good? Can we actually design for healthy emergence?
That's a really important and hopeful perspective. Not all emergent collective behaviors online are necessarily bad. We saw the K-pop fans using their collective power to drown out racist hashtags. Think about emergent positive communities, online support groups, massive fundraising efforts like the Ice Bucket Challenge that went viral. These are also emergent phenomena often amplified by algorithms.
So platforms could encourage those.
Yes. Platforms could consciously try to design their systems to foster these kinds of pro-social egregores. Maybe by emphasizing features that support community-led moderation, or algorithmically highlighting constructive discourse, or actively seeding networks with factual, helpful information during crises. The idea is to try and align the emergent properties of the system with positive societal values. Imagine an algorithm whose objective function explicitly included something like increase constructive dialogue or increase intergroup understanding. The bottom line is we are not powerless. The language of demons and egregores, while evocative, can sometimes obscure the fact that we built these systems and we can potentially rebuild or redesign them. The ethical imperative seems clear. We need to reorient the incentives and institute safeguards so that the incredible coordinating power of algorithms and networks results in more collective angels than digital demons.
It's a huge challenge.
It's a massive governance challenge, operating at multiple levels: technical design, corporate responsibility, government regulation, and even cultural norms and user education. We may never completely eliminate emergent misbehavior online any more than we can eliminate disease, but we can absolutely aim to reduce its frequency and impact, much like public health measures reduce disease outbreaks. The egregore metaphor in this sense is useful because it highlights the contagiousness and self-reinforcing nature of these phenomena, suggesting we might borrow strategies from fields like epidemiology or even fire prevention, focusing on containment, friction, and building resilience. Outro.
So in the dim glow of countless screens, we went looking for the outline of something larger than ourselves. We gave it this ancient, mystical name, egregore, partly just to try and make sense of that constant chorus of clicks, the endless churn of our feeds, and wow, what a journey it's been.
It really has. The egregore metaphor, I think, does illuminate a very visceral reality for many people. That sensation that the internet just took on a life of its own sometimes. It dramatically highlights the concept of emergence. The idea that the whole somehow becomes other than or more than the sum of its parts. A collective effect emerges with a coherence, momentum, that maybe no single individual user or even programmer ever intended.
And that helps us fight complacency.
I think so. It helps us push back against the easy dismissal of, oh, it's just people doing stuff online. It reminds us that we can be collectively influenced, maybe even possessed in a metaphorical sense, by our technologies in aggregate, even if there's no single person consciously pulling the strings.
And it really does dramatize the ethical stakes, doesn't it? It feels like a morally clarifying narrative, maybe one that could spur action. It tells us, in a way, that we risk creating our own demons with every casual click and share. That vivid imagery can definitely help communicate the urgency of governing these powerful AI-driven systems more thoughtfully.
But, as we discussed, it's definitely a double-edged sword. The egregore metaphor can seriously mislead if we take it too literally or if it pushes us towards a kind of fatalism. It risks promoting this technomysticism where we just throw up our hands and say it's out of control,
Yeah.
and that obscures the very real human agency and the concrete design choices being made behind the curtain.
Right. People still make choices. Companies employ engineers.
Exactly. We have to remember that these emergent patterns are ultimately the consequences of countless small decisions made by humans interacting with systems designed by humans. They're not magic, however strange they might seem.
It also risks lumping very different things together, as you said. A K-pop fandom, however powerful, isn't the same kind of threat as a violent extremist cell, and the solutions we need are obviously very different. And it could even let us off the hook, scapegoating the technology for much deeper social problems like ideology or economic grievance or political polarization that existed long before these algorithms.
Precisely. In truth, what we're calling an algorithmic egregore is probably best understood as an emergent, self-reinforcing pattern within these incredibly complex networks of humans and AI agents. It's real in its consequences. It absolutely acts back on the world, sometimes as if with intent. But it's not mystical in its origin.
Hmm.
It is fundamentally of our own making. It lives right at that turbulent intersection of human psychology and machine incentive structures.
So the metaphor is a bridge.
I think it serves best as a bridge between the rigorous science and the lived experience. It gives us a handle, a way to talk about what an algorithmic feedback loop feels like from the inside. But we have to be diligent about translating it back into plain mechanistic terms when we're actually trying to devise concrete solutions or assign responsibility.
So as we log off from this exploration, maybe we carry forward both the warning and the hope contained in this idea. The egregore, if it exists in any meaningful sense, seems to have no life but that which we give it through our attention, our clicks, our rituals. If modern algorithms are helping conjure these egregores, they are, in a way, reflecting our own collective shadow back at us. Data made flesh, almost, mirroring our deepest desires and fears looped back through the machine. By studying it, maybe we're forced to confront a difficult part of ourselves. And by learning to govern it, perhaps we're actually learning how to govern those parts of human collective behavior that technology has suddenly amplified beyond our previous imagining or control.
That's a profound thought. The ritual, as they say, is ongoing. The digital circle is constantly being drawn and redrawn. What these emergent forces ultimately become, angels fostering connection and creativity, demons sowing division and chaos, or maybe just powerful, and different tools that really does seem to lie in our collective hands. It's shaped by each click we make, each line of code written, each platform policy enacted, and each effort we make towards greater awareness and literacy. In that realization, perhaps, the specter loses some of its spooky power, and responsibility comes back home firmly to us.
The dawn after the dance with the egregore finds us perhaps a little wiser, maybe with the echo of its strange chorus still in our ears, but hopefully a bit clearer now on which notes were ours all along. Until next time, keep diving deep.